Hi there and welcome to Hearthside. My name is Michelle, I'm the author on this blog. I've been working on making all my entries into more accessible copies by creating video versions of them, and I'm making good progress so far. So this one I'm talking about Sigrblot in Modern and Traditional Heathenry. Now my previous video and blog entry were also on Sigrblot, as I'm doing a sort of seasonal grouping of blog entries around the season of Var, which is Heathen Springtime, focusing primarily on Sigrblot because that is the celebration that I practice in my own heathenry, but also looking at a few others that were mentioned here in the Nordic Animus Year by Rune Rasmussen, and other ones that I see associated with modern Nordic countries that are around this season as well. So yeah, diving in, last time I talked a little bit about Lunasolar Reckoning. If you haven't seen that, you can go check it out. I'll post a link down below so it's easy to find. But it's not vital to the understanding of this video, so if you choose not to, that's totally fine too. So Sigrblot hasn't really taken off as a modern holy day within heathenry. It's often assumed to be associated with victory in raids and battles, but most of the modern heathens who do celebrate it, myself included, tend to take it more as a celebration of a victory over winter. So both of these takes on the celebration probably have some historical truth, but I would also say that perhaps we can learn even more about it by understanding the lunisolar calendar in juxtaposition with the Gregorian calendar, and by examining modern folk traditions within Scandinavia. So in modern Scandinavia, the word Sigrblot is not used for any spring festivals. It's pretty much died out. And in this case I'm talking about spring as in the time between the vernal equinox and the summer solstice. I don't see within heathenry there being spring. You can also use the word var, which is planting, which I discussed in a previous video. But I'm basically talking about, the time between, in this case, the vernal equinox up into mid-May, probably, is what I'm going to be describing as spring in this video. So the closest link that we have to Sigrblot in modern time Scandinavia is called Sumersdag, Summer's Day. And when we understand that elder heathen saw Sigrblot as the beginning of the summer season, this makes total sense. So the modern festival of Sumersdag is placed right on April the 20th in the Gregorian calendar. It doesn't move back and forth like Sigrblot does, because Sigrblot follows lunisolar reckoning, which is what happened basically when Christianity was introduced to Scandinavia. That the solar calendar wanted to put fixed dates on things. Now, obviously, it didn't work for everything. Easter is on a weird sort of lunar solar calendar thing that, I mean, probably somewhat came from Judaism originally, but is a bit messed up because they wanted to put a Christian element to it. I'll get into that in a minute. But for the most part, Christianity wanted all the days to be on fixed dates within the solar calendar, so that causes things like Sigrblot to become things like Sumersdag, which is a fixed date. I would say Sumersdag is definitely the closest in similarity to probably what Sigrblot would have been, but there are other celebrations that happen during this time of year as well. So let's just step back again and look at Easter just to have an understanding of what's going on. So Easter, in some ways, is inspired by Sigrblot or spring festivals that occur in different pagan groups. And then it was overlaid with the story about Jesus' birth, which was not previously really ascribed to this particular time in the year. So that was an overlay that was put over their holy days in the same season, roughly, just to try to convert elder heathens or pagans to Christianity. Many of you are probably familiar with all the widely circulated memes about Easter, who is actually Ostera and the goddess of spring. This comes directly from Bede. He was talking about a pagan festival that coincided with Passover, now commonly called Easter, which is when the goddess of spring was worshipped. In context, I think that he wasn't too far off from the truth, but I think that he maybe did not record the name of this deity very well, or it might have been more than one deity depending on the region. It seems likely that it was not Ostera to me, and that it was Jorde, which would be like Jord, but it's spelled E-O-R-D-E-E, because this is Anglo-Saxon, right? Where we're talking about beads. So that would be the Old English version of Jord. Since it's a planting season and the pagans, in fact, were worshipping the earth, that makes sense to me. So if Sigrblot honored Jord, then Bede recorded it as Ostera. And then this later caused the Passover festival to be known as Easter after Ostera, which kind of makes sense. This is speculation. I'm using etymology to play games, but that seems the most likely to me. So if we were looking at that, then we go a step further. The revival of paganism, the vernal equinox now becomes associated with Ostera, which was from Oster, the original goddess, and being revitalized, but not following the lunar solar calendar, because that part has been lost to our reckoning, because we're so familiar with the solar calendar. So instead of celebrating Sigrblot as the holy day, now we're celebrating Ostera. Now, this is speculation. For the most part, I believe that Ostera is based primarily in modern paganism. Now, there are some roots that are to do with historical heathenry or paganism, but how much of it is that and how much of it is a modern narrative, I don't know. Someone else is probably more versed in this than me, and but that's just my speculation on the matter. So what we're looking at is pagan festivals that have to do with fertility, Ostera, Sigrblot, happening roughly around the same time of year, but one of them is fixed by the solar calendar, one of them is using the lunar solar calendar. The other thing that is interesting, as I said previously about Easter, is that it's somewhat based on the Jewish lunar solar calendar, which isn't exactly the same as the heathen lunar solar calendar, but again, it would have fixed dates and then the lunar aspect of the calendar, so that's how it works. Passover originally was quite possibly aligned with the same date as Sigrblot. But then, when it moved into Christianity, then Easter Sunday is when they wanted to celebrate. So it always had to be the Sunday. So instead of being the full moon after the new moon after the equinox, now it became the Sunday after the full moon after the vernal equinox. So out of alignment. Now, I can't say again, I don't know enough about the Jewish lunisolar calendar as to whether they would have celebrated something on the full moon after the new moon like we do in heathenry, but it would have not been on the Sunday as it is now in Christianity. So whether or not it was actually falling on the same date depends on whether they have that element which is in the heathen reckoning, which is that it's after the new moon. So complicated things if you're not familiar with the lunisolar calendar. But interesting things that show that there's a lot of similarities between religions. So the other thing about Easter and its modern reckoning is that Easter Sunday never falls on a full moon. And if the full moon is on the Sunday, then the Easter is going to be the following Sunday. So the other thing that happens when I'm celebrating Sigerblot and my husband's celebrating Easter is that about 50% of the time, Sigerblot follows the same week as Easter. But the other 50% of the time, it doesn't, and it's because of this thing where the full moon and when it falls within Christianity affects the date of the Sunday, as well as the fact that they don't recognize the new moon aspect that I do in heathenry. So those are the things that sort of put off the date slightly. But yeah, otherwise, sometimes we're celebrating stuff the same weekend, which is a challenge. But it's because they're based in the same holidays. So I think, however, like we haven't looked far enough with Sigerblot in relation to other holidays. So obviously there's a connection with Easter, there's a connection with Sommersdag, Ostera, the modern heathen pagan celebration of the equinox, but there's quite a few other dates that are spring planting holidays that fall around this time of year, so I want to go over a few of them with you. So there's March 23rd, which is Waffeldagen, which jokingly has been called Waffle Day in, I believe it's Sweden now, and they like to eat waffles on it, but that's not originally how it started. It's the festival of the Spring Lady. In Christianity, they're trying to equate this with the conception date of Mary, but it was clearly previously celebrating a goddess of spring of some sort. To me, I think of Idun in connection with this particular date, but like it could have been Jord, as I was talking about previously with the etymology, or Nerthus. I see Nerthus and Jord as similar figures, whether they're exactly the same, I don't know, but goddesses of the earth, basically. The reason why I think it's an earth goddess is that there's also an Old English prayer that's associated with this time of year, which goes, Ersi, 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 Earth's mother, give us all wielder, ever ruler, acres fruitful and flourishing, fertile and strong, high shafts, bright abundance. So it sounds like charming of the plow type ritual was associated with this. Where you dig a furrow in the ground and place the loaf within the furrow. And then you would recite this prayer. So you're asking the Earth Mother to have a bountiful summer season, basically. Sorry, I'm having a lot of interruptions here right now, but I'm going to have to take a break again. I've got a work call. I will be right back. Alright, so I think that's handled. I'm just going to try to get back into it. So I was talking about this rite, this Charming the Plow type rite, where you're putting bread into the earth, reciting this prayer about Earthsea, which sounds like an earth goddess of some sort. That's an anglicized version of the name, so like it could be Yord or it could be whatever, Nerthus or something. They sound similar to me, but like it's hard to say. And yeah, so the Christians tried to associate it with the story of Mary and her conception, but it also is very ritually symbolic of another union between the sky god and the earth goddess, culminating in the fertility of the land and production of summer crops. So in this case, within heathenry, we would look at Odin and Jord for this union, which is supported in lore. In modern times, this holiday, like I said, is quite often called Waffle Day, which, although maybe not accurate, I'm sure most modern heathens aren't going to mind that modern take. Who doesn't want to eat a bunch of waffles for no reason? It's also associated with the returning of cranes to Sweden, symbolizing the spring. Then I'm going to look closer again at Sommer's Dog on April 20th, just to make sure that we didn't miss anything previously. So this is Norwegian tradition, and associated with this rite is something buried in the earth for the purpose of prosperity of the field, just similar to the previous one that I was talking about. In this case, it's going to be grain, a sprig of juniper, and then honey that are planted in a hole, followed by feasting and toasting with beer. The Swedish take on the same tradition is banned in modern times because it involved ritual sex and using the semen from the intercourse and mixing it with the grain when it was planted. And then the next holiday that I'm looking at is St. George's Day, and you're probably like, why is it one with the saint's name? But I mean, everything's been Christianized after the Christianization of Scandinavia, so a lot of things became saints' days that were associated with deities previously. In this case, there's a ritual for St. George's Day on April 23rd, where people ritually let their dogs outside to symbolize the end of the winter, driving away the wild hunt, and that the wild hunt is no longer welcome to roam the woods, and therefore humans are allowed to return to the woods and hunt there safely. And then the next one is one that a lot of heathens are familiar with, Walpurgis Night. There's lots of different pronunciations, spellings of that one, but it's the night before May Day. In modern times, associated with bonfires, making loud noises to scare off evil spirits, and burning effigies of witches, although historically it would have been more to do with like the bonfire aspect, dancing, drinking, and fertility rites, which means sexual unions occurred largely in these rites and on these days. My speculation is that it became a bonfire as a warning to witches later on, as an attempt to stop pagans from engaging in the fertility rite portion and vilifying anyone who did as a witch. So the name of the day itself has to do with the moon name for this particular season. It's associated with the budding of leaves. So Valborg is also he's also a character in Scandinavian ballads, or she is, and her story is to do with sexual union. In this case, Valborg is the name for Freya in another ballad, which retells the story of Thor cross-dressing and retrieving his hammer from the Jotun. So it seems that it has to do with passion, feminine power, also why it was probably vilified by the church because patriarchy. So, interestingly, in Sweden, witches are also associated with the Thursday before Easter, which is called Maundy Thursday, and children dress as witches, knock on doors, requesting treats, very similar to the Halloween of North America. So we can see the shifts in modern times for the celebrations and how they've changed. I'm sorry, I'm getting a lot of notifications for work right now, even though I'm not supposed to be doing anything this afternoon. A little bit hard to concentrate. Okay. So we're seeing the new shift of the celebrations in modern times to celebrate the beginning of spring, and people are starting to think that's important again within the Nordic countries. Walpurgisnight is associated with students and graduation in modern times in Sweden, where there's drinking and bonfires that are also a celebration of the end of Swedish winter. In Finland, then, there's also the celebration of spring and graduation, marked with confetti and the consumption of donuts, and in Germany, there's still very much a bonfire, but to scare off witches, and instead of maybe the spirits of the wild hunt, which I am guessing is probably what the original intent with evil spirits would have been. So Walpurgisnight is also very much associated with the next day, May Day, which is celebration of the welcoming of spring. You're probably familiar with the dancing of the maypole. However, interestingly, this tradition is better associated with Old Midsummer in heathen practice for the elder heathens. However, there are traditions about bringing branches into the town to decorate, as well as rites involving planting, liquor as for both offerings and for toasting, and eggs. And there's also a lot of sexual unions and fertility rites going on again for this. The modern iteration of these rites is the crowning of the May Queen and her procession through the town. Wreaths of flowers are used in rites as well as for adorning people and as decorations, and in modern Sweden and Finland, May Day is their Labor Day. So, from all of this, we can determine that Sigrblot was a festival of fertility for the agricultural season, and that Sigrblot probably had a season surrounding it, like the season of Var, just the same way that Yule has a Yule season surrounding it. It's not limited just to those 3 days around the full moon. So it's associated with the agricultural season. Bonfires and toasting were definitely components, and so were often circles that were representative of the sun, as well as sexual unions and planting ritual. So if we're looking at Sigrblot from a Canadian perspective, which I gotta do, bring that back in with my blog, Canadian perspective, here we go. If we were to adapt it to fit our environment and our climate, our seasons aren't quite perfectly lined up with Scandinavia. We always have rain and cold and mud, at least in my region. Canada's pretty broad. But we need the rain for the fertility. So it's still a fairly good fit. We might be having weather more like the previous month in the lunar solar reckoning from the Scandinavia, from what I'm seeing and reading. So we might want to move it back a month, I'm not sure. And then we're looking at, if we're looking at the runic animist year, we'd be looking at Thor's month instead, or Goa month, depending on if you're looking at his reckoning of the year or the one that Joshua Rude has put forward in some of his stuff. That said, each Scandinavian country was regionally diverse as well as to when these rituals occurred, and their var looked a little bit different. So I think it's fair of us to welcome summer in with Sigrblot. But it might be too early, depending on the year, for us to be doing a planting rite at that time, so something for us to consider. And it's even possible that Sigrblot should be moved one moon later to fit with when would be the correct planting season for my particular region, or just adapt it to make it your own and a more modern context that makes sense for you. Or you can start planting indoors. That's another possibility. We have that option, modern times. But the holy day itself, associated with food, toasting fire, and a ritual for the coming summer. And that's pretty much the elements that you need, so that can be interpreted in a lot of ways. Alright, that's everything for this one, and I hope to see you next time.